Hello, this is Coding Gicha for full-stack developers. IDE tools generally have an integrated terminal built in. Visual Studio Code also has an integrated terminal built in. I will configure the built-in integrated terminal to be more powerful like the native terminal. The integrated terminal built into the IDE tools is generally inconvenient, and the integrated terminal in Visual Studio Code is also inconvenient because it is not sufficient to use as is, or because it is different from the environment of the native terminal. The shortcut key to launch the integrated terminal in Visual Studio Code is Ctrl+Grave. Grave is above the Tab keyboard and to the left of the number 1 keyboard. Grave is also called backtick. In Ubuntu's Bash shell, LL is set as an alias for commands with LS, AL options, and upper F option. I'm using LSD, which adds colors icons to the LS results. However, the icons are not displayed. The icons in terminal use font glyphs made like images, and Nerd Fonts must be installed. Even though Nerd Fonts is installed, Visual Studio Code does not recognize it, so the icons are not displayed. I installed the Vim Airline package in the Vim editor, but the icon glyphs of Nerd Fonts are not displayed properly. Let's edit the user settings of Visual Studio Code. If you add Nerd Font to the font family that matches the font you are using, an icon will appear in terminal. Of course, you need to have Nerd Fonts installed. Now, the icon will appear in terminal. Not only will the icon be displayed well in the result of LSD, but it will also be displayed well in the Vim editor. In fact, the font is used not only in terminal, but also in all screens of Visual Studio Code, and the icon of the font glyph will be displayed. Let's close Visual Studio Code in this terminal session state and run it again. Visual Studio Code on Linux supports the ability to restore the previous session state of the integrated terminal. It might be nice to be able to see the commands you ran before, but I like it minimal and clean, and it feels a bit cluttered. If you want the terminal to start in a clean session state, you can disable persistent sessions. Let's quit and run Visual Studio Code again. Now you won't see the previous commands in a cluttered way anymore. Let's go to the integrated terminal panel. In fact, the Bash shell history in Linux is so powerful that you can recall and execute previously executed commands even after rebooting. The session restore function of the integrated terminal is not very useful and can feel cluttered. With the addition of PowerShell to the terminal in Windows, the function has been strengthened as much as the history of the Bash shell, but only Visual Studio Code in the Linux environment provides the session restore function of the integrated terminal. In the native terminal, the cursor blinks to help you find the location easily, but the cursor does not blink in the integrated terminal. The Bash shell also supports various shortcuts. If you press Ctrl+K, you can cut from the cursor position to the last character. However, it does not work because it conflicts with the shortcut of Visual Studio Code. Let's edit the settings.json file by entering Ctrl+1. If you set allow chords to false, you can use the shortcuts of Bash shell without conflict. Let's set cursor blinking to true. Let's disable the notification about abnormal termination of the terminal. If you force quit a process running in integrated terminal with Ctrl+C, etc., a notification message will be displayed. This is because it displays it if exit code is not 0. Let's go to the integrated terminal panel. The cursor will start blinking. Let's cut the text with Ctrl+K. It works well without conflicting with shortcuts in Visual Studio Code. Other files in the same path can now be easily opened. The extension is JSON, but it contains comments, so it is marked as invalid syntax. The settings files related to Visual Studio Code are JSON, but they are actually internally associated with JSON-C. If the settings files had not been forcibly associated and had been used as JSON-C extensions according to the format, this phenomenon would not have occurred. It seems to have been a somewhat regrettable decision. Even if cursor blinking is enabled, the cursor does not blink in the Vim editor. If you exit the Vim editor and return to the terminal input state, the cursor will remain unblinked. Unfortunately, the integrated terminal cursor has a problem where the cursor does not blink again after executing a specific command. You can also change the background color of the integrated terminal to whatever you want. I prefer the background color of Ubuntu's native terminal. Finally, let's check if the settings applied to the integrated terminal are well reflected. It has changed similarly to the native terminal, and has become simpler and more powerful. You can also open the integrated terminal directly from the desired path. You've got the integrated terminal set up powerfully, but you might want to be able to launch native terminal from that path in a separate window. I'll also install an extension that will allow you to open native terminal directly from the path you're working on. I'll install the Open Native Terminal extension. This will allow you to launch native terminal from that path in Visual Studio Code's File Explorer. I'll open File Explorer. You'll notice that Open in Native Terminal is added to the context menu. I've set Tilix as an X-terminal emulator, and Tilix launches fine from that path. When installing multiple extensions, icons that allow you to quickly execute specific functions of the extensions may appear on the right side of the Editor tab. These can be useful in some cases, but they are often used simply as a means of promoting the installed extensions. I will remove the icon for Open in Native Terminal.
Thank you for watching.